Sure.
Hare Krishna, Navina Nirada Prabhu. Welcome to the Monks podcast. Thank you very much for joining today.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. Very happy to be
It's,
with you today.
My first interaction was with you was it was through your books. I was in Pune and knew Brahmachari, and somehow I never was very good at book distribution. Physically, I couldn't go out much, and even if I went, I was not very good. So I thought I should get some inspiration, and then I started reading Nectar of Book Distribution, and I was so inspired by this many anecdotes. We always hear many things in classes, but that was it was a systematic development of thought for how through book distribution we can actually bring about a reformation in the whole world. And somehow, based on that book, I gave a lot of brahmachari classes about book distribution. And my book distribution scores didn't improve, but other devotees' scores improved by that inspiration, apparently. So, since then, I had a desire to meet you and talk with you. And I think over the last 5-6 years, since I started spending more time in the West, we have interacted a few times, and I always found your insights about our movement, the challenges, and the opportunities that we have. It's very perspective expanding. So I'm grateful that you could come here today for this podcast. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Chaitanya Charan Prabhu. I'm very happy to be with you here today. I offer my respects to His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, all my spiritual masters, and to you.
Thank you.
It was always memorable to meet you. I honestly have to say that I can't remember you from the Pune days, but there was a lot of brahmacharis there at that time. But we did meet in recent times and had heart-to-heart discussions, which were very enlivening and encouraging for me.
Yes, Prabhu. So today I thought we could discuss on a topic that is becoming of increasing importance as our movement's leadership is, say, moving from the first generation to second generation, that how to have harmony within a multi-guru movement, that within the same temple there are disciples of different gurus, that we all interact with, sometimes the management is this management is led by a particular guru's disciples. The major devotees are maybe from some other guru. So I have talked with many leaders in our movement, especially temple presidents. I meet and talk with them when I am traveling, and often they feel that this is a great cause of dissension. That if this problem could be avoided, then we could have so much more energy to spread the movement and to share Krishna consciousness, even to relish Krishna consciousness. And even from the devotees' perspective, they also feel that this causes tensions. And we come to Krishna for relieving ourselves of anxieties, and not just anxiety entirely, but we don't want unnecessary anxiety in the devotee community. So I thought we could discuss on this topic. So what are your thoughts about it? You say you have traveled quite extensively also. So maybe you can share your experiences somewhat.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to address this most important topic of the day. In a couple of days is Nandotsava, first Janmashtami and then Nandotsava, Srila Prabhupada's appearance day. And on the day of Vyasa Puja, the disciples and grand disciples and followers of the Guru are asking themselves, how can I actually glorify my spiritual teacher adequately? So this is a very important and also a very humbling experience, because we go deeper in our hearts and we try to think what will actually glorify my spiritual master. Now, in recent days, with the passing of His Divine Grace Bhakti Charuswami Maharaj, I reread his book. And one passage stood out when he pushed the recording button in Rishikesh, and the industrialist Bajaj and his friend asked Srila Prabhupada, who will be your successor? And Srila Prabhupada mentioned that whoever follows my instructions will be my successor. Srila Prabhupada also mentioned that your love for me will be shown in as much as you cooperate after I'm gone. Now, as you have mentioned, I have traveled the world extensively, and unfortunately, I have noticed in many places that even though most of our spiritual masters are still here, the fighting is already going on. Usually the culture is you wait before the guru, till the guru leaves, and then you start fighting. You don't fight while the guru is still there for the
So you're
spiritual
saying that,
master.
sorry to you're saying that there is
Like
a
but
conflict
for a parent,
between
if his
the,
children are fighting,
no, you are saying there's conflicts between disciples of the same guru also. Are you saying that, or okay?
yes, yes, and even more so, conflicts amongst different types of disciples of different gurus who feel that, oh, my guru has his mood and your guru has his mood, so you do your thing, I do my thing. Now, I'm not here to criticize, I'm not here to teach, I'm just here to share some of the things that I have noticed in my travels and in my studies of the Shastras, of the Vaishnava scriptures. So in the mood of Gop Kumar, who traveled the universe and admired different personalities. And so I was in Udupi, and I got off at the wrong bus stop. So I was just on the street wandering, and then one Jeep stopped, and it was the chief of police of Udupi and Manipal. So they both took me in their Jeep, and they said, wherever you want to go, we'll drive you there. So we had a very lively discussion. They were so happy to have this Western, what they thought was a sadhu, in their company while they were going to office. It was early morning. And so we talked, and they asked who I was, where I was from, what I was doing. And then at the end, they said, you know, we really like you ISKCON guys, but we have one question to you. Why here in this small area of Udupi and Manipal are there 4 different ISKCON groups? For us, it's very confusing because we're the police, and and we're working together, even though we have so many different stations and so many different commanders. So why do you have 4 different groups in such a small place? And I just laughed and I said, it's complicated. We're a very young movement, and we're working on it. But just to give you another story that shows how it can be done in a different way. When I was in Uzbekistan, in the city of Tashkent, which is just a little bit north of India, formerly the Surya temple, huge temple for the worship of Surya Dev, which is now, of course, abandoned and derelict. So the devotees there, they took me to a shrine of a Sufi saint. And we were both in plain clothes, and there was one Muslim person there, one Sufi praying. And as he got up, he told us that today is a very fortunate day. I see that you have come here to this tomb of this saint, and I know you're devotees of Krishna, and you're chanting God's names, and I very much appreciate that. So today, by Allah's grace, I'd like to invite you to my home to share a meal with me. And I pray that all your spiritual desires will be fulfilled. So I was very touched because I was in a different country. This is a follower of a different religion. And he didn't know me, but he made me feel very welcome. He made me feel very accepted and very much loved. Whereas in other times, just to give you another example, being in a certain temple and a senior citizen walked up to me, and because I start looking a little bit older, so he asks me, "Are you a disciple of Srila Prabhupada?" And I say no. So he just turned around and walked away from me. And I felt like, did I say something wrong? like, you know, like in these days, racism is a big topic.
Mm.
But oftentimes we're not aware of how this tribalism and racism and territorialism is a very strong underlying current because of whatever conditioning that we may identify ourselves with. So when we read Chaitanya Charitamrita and Chaitanya Bhagavat, we see what you have described as a multi-guru environment where people of different spiritual masters are living together. And I just like to mention two very striking points, which is in the Rath Yatra at Puri, where there is 7 different groups performing kirtan with their own leaders, with their own instruments. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is actually present in all the 7 groups. And he's encouraging them all equally. So I found that very striking and very encouraging, how ISKCON is expanding, and we have literally devotees in all continents and in all countries. And that Srila Prabhupada would be very pleased if, as he noticed, that it was Bhaktivinoda Thakur's dream that the Bengalis, together with the Russians and the Prussians, the Germans and the Americans and all the other devotees would chant Jai Sachinandana Gaura Hari. So that was his vision, that was his dream, that was his aspiration. And so as humble servants and aspiring followers of our previous acharyas, we should try to see what can we do in order to actually get to that point where there is no insecurity, there is no restrictions.
Okay. You know, this is a very moving comparison. Sometimes points come out very powerfully when you bring out contrast. Like we're welcomed by a member of a group, religion that is considered sometimes to be quite extremist, and then we are given a cold shoulder by somebody from our own movement. So now, see, sectarianism is a universal human problem. It could be sectarianism could be because of race, it can be because of nationality, it can be because of even regionality. Even in India, there can be regional consciousness. India is such a big place, and it's not just in India. Even I've seen when I've interacted with people in America, people in the middle part of America, they have a very different view from those who are in the coastal parts of America. Or say a person in Florida or Texas, they think very differently from say those who are in New York or LA. So there are different, it is almost a universal human weakness to be sectarian, to find some reasons by which we form our own groups and we differentiate. So now there are 2 points over here. That one aspect is that somehow the relationship with the spiritual master is seen in our tradition as not just a spiritual relationship, but the central or the defining spiritual relationship. And then that seems, or the based on the spiritual masters, based on our relationship with the spiritual master, we often see that as a defining part of our spiritual identity. So to somehow to see, so naturally if I'm connected with a particular spiritual master, I connect with that spiritual master and then I connect with the God family of that, around that spiritual master. So because that is seen so central to our spiritual identity, that to consider that as a sectarianism similar to other kinds of sectarianism, that seems a little jarring. That somehow we think that no, this is natural, this is desirable, this is spiritual. I belong over here. So another point is that I agree with you that in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, we have many devotees living together. Uh, but in fact, we don't even know who their spiritual masters are. Mhm. So mostly, maybe all of them were initiated by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, but some of them were his seniors, some of them his juniors. So that was we could say, a historically unusual period where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, God himself, he was like the one central authority over there. We could say within ISKCON's history, when Prabhupada was there, it is a historically distinctive phase. But Srila Prabhupada himself emphasized the spiritual master and the relationship with the spiritual master as the central defining relationship. Now, if we consider the previous traditions, so I'm making this a long question and I will summarize it, what I'm going at. So the first part
I got you.
The first part I wanted to say is that
Okay.
it is a defining identity. It is seen as spiritual, and somehow based on that, we don't see it as sectarian normally. Second is this emphasis on the relationship with the spiritual master seems to come from Prabhupada's books and Prabhupada's works itself, because he emphasizes spiritual master enormously. And third is that overall in the tradition, if you go to the Mahabharata, Mahabharata, it's 110,000 verses, and Vyasadeva doesn't even spend half a verse to tell us who is the spiritual master of the Pandavas. They have Drona as their martial teacher, they have Dhaumya as their priest, and they learn from many gurus. So they, or rather, they learn from many teachers. So we don't see this focus on the spiritual master, on the spiritual master at all. There, what we see is a general respect for Brahminical culture, and we learn from many spiritual teachers. So the point I'm making is that these three things. So we are in a very distinctive position.
I got your point. I got your point. Yeah. Can I comment?
Yeah, please.
Thank you. Yes. So to me, it boils down to culture. In the Mahabharata, we have our culture. In a similar way, it's quite astounding if you watch and read the appreciations of Bhakti Charuswami Maharaj. Did you notice how everybody said the same thing? He was my best friend. Did you notice that? Did you find it striking? I found it very striking. Even people who I knew who were at odds with him managerially would say he was my best friend. And that's, Dhira Dhira Janak Priya Prakara. He had no enemies. I remember he came to Switzerland in 85. I was a young bhakta, and he came where the Sankirtan devotees was staying. It was not even a temple. It was a small little farmhouse. And he cooked chow mein for us. He cooked Chinese noodles for us. And we were not his disciples. It was not his zone. But he came there because he wanted to show his appreciation for the Sankirtan devotees. So sometimes in the name of service, it's very easy to do disservice. And that comes because of a lack of culture. Just like in cultured society, you revere your parents, you respect your parents, but you do not flaunt your parents' greatness amongst other people, because it's not considered cultured, and it's not considered that it will do a service to your parents. So in a similar way, it is stated that we should not publicly flaunt the glories of our spiritual master, because there are people who may not be able to appreciate that. In fact, it will create a reverse, an opposite effect. Just to give you a small example, when Kamalakanta Bishwas, who was the assistant of Advaitacharya, glorified Advaitacharya as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Chaitanya was very pleased. But when he, in the same course, went on to say that Advaitacharya owes a debt of 300 rupees, then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, no, 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 this is wrong. And he chastised him severely, and he called him a Baal. He said that he's a Sahajya, follower of an Appa Sampradaya, and he did not want to see him. He rejected him. And Advaitacharya felt that he had been slighted because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was giving his love in the form of punishment to Kamalakanta Vishwas, where he was praising Advaitacharya. So we have this story. So if we want to know what culture is, then we have to read Prabhupada's books. You know, I have done surveys around the world, and unfortunately, less than 10% of our congregation and our members own a set of Prabhupada's books, and also less than 10% of our members have read all of Prabhupada's books. Otherwise, if you would study Bhagavatam and Chaitanya Charitamrita, you could see these examples, just like
Okay, just a pause.
the point that you're making about not confusing worship of spiritual master and personality cult. Like Guru Parampara is a system. It's Krishna's system, the system that has been established. But who that particular guru is not the point. That is not so important as long as you are in Parampara. So if we're doing this service in the name of service, then what kind of a disciple are we? If we're not able to actually serve our spiritual master because of our own conditioning or our own ignorance. So just to give you another short story, when Prabhupada was at John Lennon's estate.
Just one minute, sorry to interrupt you. So now I'm just trying to understand. So when you made the point that everybody felt Bhakti Charu Maharaj was their friend, so you are giving that as an example of a cultured Vaishnava being able to see beyond the my disciples or the guru grouping kind of mentality. Is that the example you're making through that?
Absolutely.
Okay, and then
he was never.
No, I got that point. Then Kamalakant Vishwas and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Advaitacharya, how is that related with the guru point? What is the point over there exactly of that example?
That sometimes in the name of doing service, we're actually doing disservice. Kamalakanta Vishwas was thinking that he was actually glorifying Advaitacharya as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but then he was disclosing something that was not supposed to be in there, which was his own insecurity. He was his secretary, his assistants. He knew about the financial dealings of Advaitacharya, and he knew that there was a debt of 300 rupees. But bringing that out in public created a disservice to Advaitacharya. So in a similar way, if we're not broad-minded and sensitive and cultured to the environment that we're in, we can create a disservice to our spiritual masters. And I had to notice this very early when I started traveling, because I became the Minister of Book Distribution in the 1990s. And I kind of told myself that even if the Taliban would start selling Prabhupada's books, I would go there today to Afghanistan to train them to distribute Prabhupada's books, because it's my mission. So, and honestly speaking, I've been to many places in ISKCON which have a very closed-minded, a very narrow type of understanding. And it was quite shocking to see how Krishna consciousness is being practiced and preached amidst very big, I mean, they call it, you know, good fences make good neighbors.
Yeah.
But then you also see that, like, you know, in the truck here, it says, my India is great. And next door, it says, my Pakistan is great. And next door, it says, my Bangladesh is great. So everybody thinks they're great because it's the place of their birth. But when we read Chaitanya Charitamrita, Ye Krishna Tattva Veta, say Guru Hoy. Why did Chaitanya Mahaprabhu speak this verse? You know, Kiba Vipra, Kiba Nyasi, Shudra Kenano, Ye Krishna Tattva Veta, say Guru Hoy. And in the purport, Prabhupada and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur mentions twice that irregardless of your caste, of your background, of your cultural conditioning, if you know the science of Krishna, you can become a spiritual master. Now, I was on the GBC in the 1990s, and it was wild times. And if you would have mentioned that a non-Prabhupada disciple could be a sannyasi guru or GBC, people would be seriously disturbed and seriously object to that, because that was just the beginning of a new era, so to speak. So education is the way forward. Education is really the way of how we can overcome these insecurities. Just like now there's a ISKCON Disciples course, and there's also a course for ISKCON Gurus. Unfortunately, we see that oftentimes people do either not take the ISKCON Disciple course, or they just take it before initiation instead of taking it before choosing a guru, which is kind of counterproductive. Like Prabhupada one time mentioned, when he saw a wedding ceremony and there was a baby there, Prabhupada said, "What is that? Usually wedding is first and then baby comes second, you know?" There has to be a sequence. So the connection is that we have to learn the culture by actually studying our own tradition, our own Siddhanta, and seeing what is giving glory to Prabhupada, what is actually making Prabhupada happy. In a similar way, like Kamalakanta Vishwas, there are many who were very strong advocates of propounding Prabhupada as a Shaktivesha avatar. I don't know if you remember, but that has been something that has been, pushed as a Mahavakya. And then the same group of people, interestingly enough, in the very short time after said, and nobody can become a spiritual master. Only Prabhupada could be a spiritual master. So in one sentence, you say Prabhupada is a Shaktivesha avatar. He is an empowered incarnation. And in the second sentence, you say, but he was incapable of leaving even one disciple behind who was qualified to give initiation. And it's such a contradiction, But people are able to reconcile that because the mind, and that is coming back to your point of human nature, of human conditioning, that we are very comfortable with the way we think the world is supposed to be, but unfortunately, that is not reality. And that's why it's important that we study history. And Prabhupada encouraged us. He said, you study other religious movements and you see what went right, what went wrong, and what can we learn from it? What can we do better? And oftentimes he gave the painful example of the Gaudiya Math, where he grew up in. And he mentioned that some of his god brothers called him a pacha grihasta, a rotten grihasta, that he was not feeling welcomed in some places, whereas with other god brothers, he felt very welcomed and encouraged. Prabhupada personally wrote letters and invited his god brothers to come to America. He said, I'll organize the mission. You be the acharya. I'll do all the management. And nobody came and nobody helped him. And then later on, he said to Hari Sori, look with the binoculars over to the Gaudiya Math and tell me what's going on over there. And Hari Sori said, nothing's going on over there. And Prabhupada said, exactly, that's what's going on. Nothing is going on over there because they have not actually understood the message of Guru Maharaj. I was in Rishikesh, and there are many, many ashrams in Rishikesh.
Just 1 minute, if you don't mind, just 1 minute. There's a lot of points
Yes.
you're making.
Sure.
So, see, definitely Prabhupada was very distressed by what happened to the Gaudiya Math after Bhaktisiddhanta Thakur's departure. No doubt about that. And he didn't want that to happen to our movement or to his movement. So there was one point which you mentioned that before that the connection with the Guru Parampara is important. The specific person who is the Guru is not that important. So now this is something which many devotees may find it very difficult to accept, not just at an emotional level, but also at a scriptural level. Because Prabhupada himself emphasizes the spiritual master inordinately in his books. And he doesn't talk about a spiritual master as a figurehead or as a symbol of a connection. He talks about a spiritual master as a living, loving person whom we should please. So now, in one sense, we could say that while Prabhupada's books are eternal, they are also written at a particular context. So Prabhupada wrote those books when there's only one spiritual master, and now we have multiple spiritual masters. So this point that the spiritual master, the spiritual master is a tattva and is also a person, both. So this is something which maybe we can analyze this a little bit more and discuss this point, because we're talking about, say for example, that devotees are not reading Prabhupada's books or the Gaudiya Math went wrong. That is true, but there is a particular reason for this, and there is a particular conception of the spiritual master that is there. And if that conception itself needs to be reconceptualized, then we need to look at that root rather than looking at what has grown from that root.
I hear you. Yes. So we have to see how can we get to where to where we want to go. What's the route? How can we arrive there? And it is only through education.
Yes.
If you analyze history, it is only movements that have instituted education that are still alive today. And all the others who have subscribed to personality cults, they have not. Srila Prabhupada in 1956, in the Gita Nagari prophecy, he was mentioning Gandhi, and he brought up the point that it's not in building brick monuments and making great speeches and eulogies that we will actually please our founding fathers, but in creating communities that are built on the principles which they have left us. So as you have mentioned, Guru Parampara and Guru Tattva is our theology, and there is also the personality, the individual as a guru. And there has to be a balance between the two. It's not that we say, okay, this is our law, and it doesn't matter from whom you take initiation. Because for us, it certainly matters very much, because that's our connection. But in the bigger scheme of things, who is your exact Diksha Guru is not that important in a bigger scheme of things. Just like you see in Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, he always says Gurun, always in plural. Oftentimes you don't even know. So who is his Diksha Guru now? Because he's mentioning so many personalities from whom he learned and under whom he studied. Because that is the emphasis. And in the very same purport of Yaredeke Tarikaha, Prabhupada makes the point that Varma Pradarshaka, Shiksha Guru, and Diksha Guru are equally important, and they should be equally respected and equally worshipped. And unfortunately, out of neophyte, Ati Bhakti, too much devotion, and Utsahamai, being very enthusiastic to glorify our Guru, we have created a personality cult where people have started printing t-shirts and bumper stickers and posters and go out to canvass about their Guru. And I mean, you're in India, you know better than me. How many times have you sat in a rickshaw and there was a bumper sticker of some guru or some sadhu or some babaji or some, and you ask yourself, is this what the movement has become? Is this what was meant, by this person's legacy? So how can we prevent this? Through education.
Yes, bro, just a minute. I agree with you that education is important. Now, the word personality cult has a very strong negative connotation. and we definitely are not, and we don't want to become a personality cult. At the same time, it could very well be said that in some ways we are a personality cult centered on Prabhupada. So, in fact, there are many traditional Hindus who come to our temples and they say that in most Hindu temples, you don't have the image of the Guru prominently in the temple. In most Sri Vaishnava temples, Ramanujacharya's deity will be somewhere else. In fact, usually at the entrance, we either have Garuda or we have Ganesha. So, in fact, they say that you have brought a centrality to your Guru, which is not according to the either the Hindu tradition or the Vedic tradition. So we can say that we don't want a personality cult, and that's definitely true. But isn't the origin of personality cult coming from our own books and our own systems? So are we saying that we can have a personality cult around Prabhupada but not around his disciples? Then there is that differentiation which you'll have to make. So
that would be hypocrisy. I mean, Prabhupada is our founder acharya, and every founder acharya has a very unique, distinct category. He's not just a guru, he is the founder acharya. Yes. And Prabhupada insisted on that position to make it clear. And so that's a historic precedent. And you have the same amongst the Madhvayites, that they all revere Madhvacharya, amongst the Ramanujis, that they all revere Ramanujacharya, even thousands of years later, because he is their founder acharya. So Prabhupada has a very unique position. So personality, there's nothing wrong with personality. We are people, and we can only relate to people. That is natural and that is understood. But to turn it into a cult means that we actually separate the person from the teachings of the person or what the person stands for. And we are just instrumentalizing the person. Just like Prabhupada was criticized that he did not get out of the car to pay respects to his Guru Maharaj's Samadhi. And he said, they do not see what I am doing. I am following the instructions of my spiritual master. I'm preaching. I am developing Mayapur. That is his desire. And my Guru Maharaj is always present with me. Otherwise, it becomes about building bigger monuments. So then you have bigger samadhis and more lavish praise and decorations. But that is counterproductive. That is really not in the spirit of what our teachers expected of us.
Yes, so I got this. I mean, it's a good central point. That personality cult is when you separate the person from their teachings and emphasize the person to such an extent that the teachings get obscured. So attraction to the person, or even attraction to the personality of the person, that is fine. That's a part of one's relationship. But that attraction should lead us to follow the teachings. And those teachings, if we come to Prabhupada, as you said, he asked us to cooperate. So is that how you would say differentiating personality cult and say worship of the Guru? Worship of the Guru means we may be attracted to the person of the Guru, but that leads to us inspired to follow the teachings. Whereas personality cult means we become so centered on the Guru that we focus more on just talking about the Guru and just proclaiming the Guru rather than following the teachings of the Guru. Is that how you differentiate?
Okay. Yes, absolutely.
That's a very good point.
And that is a core point, because oftentimes when Vaishnavas depart, then everyone cries, and sometimes we feel remorseful because we did not take enough of their association and we did not connect enough to their teachings. And sometimes that is also enhanced by the sectarianism of their disciples, who make it almost impossible to access the Guru or the teachings of the Guru. Like, you have traveled extensively in America, and have you ever met a born-again Christian.
Yeah. I was in
And
Denver. I was going for a walk,
and
and
you saw,
this person was in a car, and he got out of the car and he wanted to sell me a Bible and wanted to invite me to come for a program. It was quite funny.
it was quite funny, isn't it? So have you ever met a born-again Hare Krishna?
It's a good way of looking at it. So very
I have met,
aggressive, very intrusive. Is that what you're
yes,
saying?
yes. And my guru is the only guru, and anyone who does not follow my guru and worship my guru cannot go back to Godhead and does not understand what's actually going on. And so in the name of service to Gurudev, they're actually doing disservice to Guru. That's why, like, when we're serving our spiritual masters, we have to be very careful that we do not fall into that trap, because otherwise we would actually cause pain and disservice. Prabhupada gave the example of the sons massaging the body of the father, and then they're pinching on the other side to make it look like the other son is not doing a good job. You know that story, that example.
Yeah.
So that's why history is there, to learn from it. And if we see how the Goswamis would work on each other's books, how they would edit each other's books, they would write commentaries to each other's books, and in this way they would actually assist each other in their preaching. So in such an environment, a great abundance of preaching and of Vaishnava Sangha can happen. And I remember very fondly in the 80s and early 90s, when all the ISKCON gurus and sannyasis and their disciples would participate in Navadvip Mandal Parikrama. And together, as a loving family, perform this function of parikrama. Whereas the tendency nowadays is more individual small groups of gurus with their disciples go to certain places, but it's not seen as a activity that is actually open towards others. So in the name of inclusive, in the name of exclusiveness, sometimes we can become sectarian. And that is a great danger that we have to safeguard against individually and also collectively. That's why this moment in history of our movement is very crucial, that there was a Guru Systems reform back in the 80s, and Guru Reform 2.0 is, is in the works, that people actually sit together and think very deeply, what is the legacy? What are we leaving behind? What is the future? Just to give you a practical example, right now we have about 1 million dedicated members of this institution. Out of the 100 gurus that we have, less than half are still actively initiating, which means that 50 gurus for 1 million disciples, you do the math, you're a scientist, that would mean 20,000 disciples per guru. Now, would you like to take your new 300 disciples before or after breakfast? I mean, it just doesn't work, practically speaking. Otherwise, we end up being like certain movements where they just throw some holy water into the crowd and say, okay, now everybody's initiated. And I was in Rishikesh, there's so many ashrams, and except Guru Purnima, nobody shows up. So people only come once a year for Vyasa Puja or Guru Puja, but they have not really understood what is the mission of their spiritual master. Prabhupada was criticizing a certain Swami or sadhu who came and sold mantras for $35. Now the rate has gone up. It's probably $500 from different groups, what they charge for their mantras. So we have to safeguard to not fall into this trap that we make it a very exclusive, elitist type of a thing that is not acceptable, not accessible to other people. Because Prabhupada really said he had a disease, he could not think small, he could only think big. He said, I want to spread Krishna consciousness everywhere at once. So how does he do that? By empowering people. You remember the story when he was in Delhi on a train and he told his disciples, you, and you get off. You start a temple here. And he said, I'll give you 50 rupee as a loan, 50 rupee as a loan to start a center in Delhi. And now we have over a dozen temples in Delhi. So Prabhupada empowered people. But nowadays, we have to analyze and see, are we empowering people? Are we making it appealing and interesting and exciting? And do people want to take part in this movement? ISKCON has almost 1,000 centers now. And there is at least another 1,000 or 2,000 ISKCON-friendly affiliates. So many devotees went out and opened their own nonprofits, their own, societies and companies and incorporations, and can be a topic for a different discussion, unity and diversity, if that is the way forward. But we have to see, what is their interaction with ISKCON? So is it actually pleasing to Prabhupada, and is there continuity? If you see nowadays the movements that have lasted amongst all these different groups that came in Prabhupada's time, very few of them have actually lasted. Very, very few of them have actually lasted. And those who lasted are the ones who understood empowerment, just like Swami Narayan Group, Pramukh Swami. He came to New Vrindavan in 1980. He saw a palace of gold, and he decided, I'm going to build what they have done. And he built over 1,000 of such temples, 1,000 palaces of gold. Why? Because he understood the principle of empowerment. And the Swami that builds the temple is not the Swami who is the Mahant who is going to manage the temple. He has to move on. It's another guy who comes who has to manage the temple. So nobody has the feeling that this is my temple, this is my disciple, this is my zone. Because that's an upadi. That's a designation. Nobody's owned. We're all here to do seva. We're all supposed to become nishkinchana devotees. And unless we understand that, we'll fall into this trap of insecurity that we think, this is my property, I can control it, I have ownership now, and then it becomes an apasampradaya, where they just show the deity or they just show the samadhi of the guru in order to make money, but they do not actually preach the message of the spiritual master. And that is a great danger.
Yes, well, thank you. A lot of points there. So I think we'll have to go back one by one. So non-possessiveness, I'll go back to empowerment. I think that would be an entirely different subject. If we have so many if we have so many aspiring devotees and so few spiritual masters, then probably we need to have more and more devotees initiating. And then probably if there are
yes, that is a good idea.
No, that could be one thing. So if we have many,
Srila Prabhupada said in 1975 that I want all my disciples to earn this degree of Bhaktivedanta and to become initiating disciples. That was
yes, Prabhupada said that. I know that.
1975.
So the thing is that so that could be one way.
45 years ago.
Yeah.
And so we have to see, is it happening? We've had dozens of Prabhupada disciples who are passed away, but their disciples are not initiating. So what can we do to further that?
That's true. I think, empowerment, if we have many spiritual masters initiating, then that itself would, in one sense, diffuse the focus from the spiritual masters. Because if in one temple there are maybe 25 gurus disciples, then the focus on my guru and your guru will naturally go down. So in one sense, that could be one way where the spiritual master is someone we connect with individually and we are individually inspired by. But then if there are many different devotees inspired by different spiritual masters, then that will become more a matter of personal inspiration, personal devotion. That will not necessarily overshadow our social interactions within the devotee community.
Absolutely. Just to give you a personal example, I'm here in the Bay Area of California. And because of the tech industry, there is over 500,000 Indians here in the Bay Area.
Hmm.
So in the ISKCON of Silicon Valley, ISV, we have disciples of several dozens of gurus here. And they work together very nicely in cooperate in preaching and in outreach. And there's usually 10,000 people on Jamastami, although it's a small temple building, small church. And it works. And I talk regularly to the recruiters in the tech industry because there's people from every nationality here in the Bay Area who work for
Hmm.
these big tech corporations. And I ask them, what are the criterias under which you recruit people? And they say, it's not skill, it's ability to work in a team and to put your own ego down and to actually pass the ball, to be a team player. That is the primary number one quality for recruitment. You can be a smart nerd and can be in your lab and develop something. But if you want to be management, if you want to be on the board of something, you have to be a team player. You have to
Hmm.
pass the ball. You cannot be a ball hog. Like for instance, you're in India. So if you score a century, but your team loses 150 to 300, are you going to be very happy? I scored a century. Baba, your team lost.
That's true.
So in a similar way, right now, we are so trigger happy that we want to score. We want to have our own individual
Hmm.
achievements. But if we're not seeing that our institution is actually moving forward, that we're
Definitely.
actually delivering the goods. Right now, the product is not available on the market. We cannot sell something that's not available in stock, you know? Oh,
Yeah,
pre-ordered. You know, you can
that's true.
pre-order. You can pre-order your guru. Maybe you'll get initiation in 5 or 10 years. Maybe, maybe. Hey, I have news for you. There are other groups out there. We do not have a monopoly on bhakti. There are other groups out there who are ready to give you initiation
Hmm.
today or yesterday.
So this is one
So,
solution. Okay. I mean, I appreciate your point, but this is one solution which is not really in the hands of individual devotees. That could be a whole different subject of empowering more and more of our first generation and second generation leaders to initiate. That's one solution which is at an institutional level, and maybe we could discuss this with the institutional leaders. Let's look at it more from a individual devotee perspective right now. So I want to go back to an earlier point when you talked about yatras. Say now quite often each spiritual master takes their own yatras. So if we just consider now, in the past, maybe all gurus would come together for a Vrindavan parikrama or Mayapur parikrama. So there are two, three different things over here. First is that the number in our movement has become so big that I don't think if the whole movement came to Mayapur at a particular time, Mayapur or Vrindavan could accommodate them. Here, thousands and thousands, is that if a million devotees we have, practically it's not possible. And even more important, bhakti is about relationships. So I don't just want to belong to a diffuse movement of millions. I want to connect with people. I want to connect with people. So, that when somebody goes with a yatra with their spiritual master, uh, that is an opportunity for devotees to connect with each other. So, if our movement is to move forward, at one level, we want to avoid sectarianism, but at another level, we want to have connections. And connections have to be on some basis. So sometimes it could be like one temple does an activity together. Sometimes it could be that one devotees with one service. Say recently I heard that there was a conference of all devotee attorneys in Florida. So that was their service and how they could come together for that service. And the guru, it is my spiritual master through whom I come together. So I feel that we need relationships, and we have
yes.
grown beyond a particular point where we can't expect the whole movement to be united. The whole movement coming to Mayapur is impractical now. So now,
Well,
okay, let me
I
complete this point.
disagree. Yeah.
Let me complete this point that what we need. is for like-minded devotees to come together. And
Agreed.
that like-minded devotees coming together can happen in various ways. It can happen through people at a particular place, people in a particular service, people initiated by a particular spiritual master, people attracted by a particular holy place or a particular manifestation of Krishna. So we can't. So that kind of coming together for a closer bonding, that is not. I don't see that as sectarian, because we cannot get inspiration in a group. We get inspiration through individual connections. So the same. This is, I'll just draw a parallel with the caste system in India. The caste system is often thought as a sense of as a cause of discrimination. Can you hear me?
I hear you very well, yeah.
Yeah. So the caste system is often seen as a source of discrimination, but historically speaking, the caste system, it's distorted now, but it also brought greater connection. So all people belonging to a particular varna, they bonded closer to each other. Now the unfortunate part was there was like a big like China wall of China or some big wall between the varnas, which is undesirable. So we need to provide devotees mechanisms for coming closer to each other. At the same time, we don't want walls between different groups of devotees. So
Thank you.
just
Yes.
devotees coming together is not unhealthy. But
No, I'm not saying that. My point is that bringing closer doesn't mean closed-minded, you know? You can be close, but you don't have to be close-minded.
yes,
Otherwise,
I agree
it's
with you
it's
fully.
counterproductive. So in a similar way, we're one movement, and there is many flavors and many teachers and many, you know, preferences. Everybody can find their svajatiya, and that is available. But unless we understand the shiksha, because we're a shiksha sampradaya, and so unless we actually understand the teachings, it will become counterproductive, and it will fragment, and it will fizzle.
Yes.
So we have to be aware of that and safeguard against that. So you were saying on an individual level, what we can do? We can do, for instance, that we make people feel welcome. We make people feel comfortable in our association. We do not discriminate against them. Like right now, there's so much conflict about race and gender and color of skin and nationality, etc. It's an ongoing, you know, story. Formerly it was tribalism. Now there are subgroups and subgroups of the subgroups. You know, like you can be in a certain place, and even amongst the disciples of a certain guru, there are many, many different camps who may not necessarily get along with each other just because of a lack of a broader understanding. Doesn't mean
Hmm.
that we have to get lost in the crowd. You know,
Yeah.
you can be very connected in a crowd, and you can be lonely in a crowd, or you can be alone by yourself and you're fully connected. Prabhupada was by himself, but he never felt separated from his spiritual master or from Vrindavan or from his dear God brothers. So it's not a, you know, Krishna consciousness is not a zip code or a t-shirt. It's not just
Yeah. Good
a certain
zip code
specific
t-shirt.
uh,
Brilliant way of
yeah,
putting it.
a
Zip
certain
code
specific
t-shirt.
location. So it's important that we remind ourselves of that. Otherwise, we get stuck in that paradigm. So Prabhupada, he made sure that people could relate to him. Like in one of your former interviews, I really like that story. Somebody said that Prabhupada took out the trash in New York to bond with Rubens, the owner of 26 Second Avenue.
Yes,
So,
Anuttama mentioned that. Yeah.
so he didn't say, "Hey, I'm a Swami, I'm a guru," you know, like I can't touch this, you know, this is untouchable. But he knew how to bond with that person. And he talked with John Lennon's gardener about British sports cars, and he bonded with John Lennon's gardener, who got very great appreciation for Prabhupada and Krishna consciousness, because Prabhupada made that step to make him feel comfortable. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had meat served to the British governor who came to Mayapur, and they built a post office and built Bhaktisiddhanta Road because they were very appreciative of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's achievement. I think eventually they didn't even have the meat, but Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was challenged by his disciples, and he said 1,000 lifetimes ago, I was thinking exactly like you, but I have decided that there is nothing I will not do to spread Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission. So if we are mission-centered and we are centered on Siddhanta, on Tattva, and at the same time we develop personal relationships, and there's flavors and there's likes, and sometimes also seemingly dislikes or aversions that can be there. At the same time, we have to make sure that those do not take the upper hand and they make closeness into close-mindedness. And then we become sectarian and it becomes unattractive and unappealing. Why right now there's so much conversion going on in India? There's
Just
different
1 minute before we move forward. I like this contrast.
Major factor, just because you brought it up, one major factor is because of the abuse and the neglect and the exploitation. And in a similar way, people vote with their feet. You know, the world is a global village nowadays. And if your center is not attractive, and if your way of dealing with your guests is not appealing, people will go somewhere else. And that is just the way of the world. So those places who have learned to incorporate that, they're flourishing. And other places, they will become obsolete. That is just the way of the world.
That's true. You know, Prabhu, this is a good thought. I mean, maybe we can develop this as a concluding part, that how to have closeness without close-mindedness. So I thought of one thing, that now if I look at my own life, and maybe you can share from your life, that for me, for all of us, we have different layers of identity to ourselves. Ultimately, we are souls who are parts of Krishna. But say you have identity as a book distributor. I may have identity as a traveling speaker, or as a writer, or as a brahmachari. So quite often, and of course, I have identity as a disciple of a particular spiritual master. So if devotees develop their individuality in bhakti, that means, okay, what is my contribution to Krishna's service? What is my contribution to Prabhupada's mission? And then that will naturally lead to a gravitation toward like-minded association. And if I develop a healthy respect for my individuality, then I'll also develop a healthy respect for somebody else's individuality. So their individuality will not be a threat for my individuality. So if a devotee's defining identity becomes centered on offering their individuality to Krishna, then they will naturally gravitate towards like-minded devotees, and they will let others devotees gravitate toward like-minded devotees. So, for example, that I am more of, we could say, a thinker, writers. So, some of my best friends are those who are thinkers, and thinkers that way. Now, when I interact with them, what to speak of whose disciples they are, but even which ashram they belong to, which nation they belong to, even what culture they were born and brought up in, this doesn't matter. Because we are united in the purpose of serving Krishna. So instead of simply saying that we should be united in the purpose of serving Krishna, if we can create within each devotee that purpose of serving Krishna, then there will be a healthy unity that will come. But if a devotee, instead of having that purpose of serving Krishna, the devotee's defining identity is, that I am a disciple of the spiritual master, and glorifying this spiritual master is the basis of my identity, then that purpose so if the individuality is properly dovetailed in bhakti, then that kind of, we can have closeness but no close-mindedness. However, if a devotee's identity is based on primarily belonging to a group, the primary identity is that I am a disciple of the spiritual master, or I belong to this temple, then that will have, you might have a closeness within the God family or closeness with the temple, but that could lead to close-mindedness. So if we are centered
Yes,
on service, then we can have closeness without
absolutely. I fully
close-mindedness.
agree. Thank you for that point.
Yes, Prabhu. So
Yes.
you
And
like,
unfortunately, sometimes we experience this even amongst our own kind, that you may be in a group of your God brothers and you experience close-mindedness, and you might be in a group of disciples of other gurus and you encounter more acceptance and more inclusiveness. So that runs across all the bars.
yes.
As a concluding point, in one of his last classes, Bhakti Charuswami was mentioning that ISKCON is constipated. And I can see that nobody wants to be the enema. Nobody wants to be the person who takes it upon themselves to actually bring about change. Because change is always painful. It's always painful to change things because it means we have to have a change of mindset, a change of paradigm, and it's not so comfortable. For those of us who had to travel and had to encounter different challenges in their lives, like you were mentioning earlier in our talk about my history, and I went through the zonal acharya days where wherever you joined, that was your guru, and it was a disproportionate worship of an individual, even over Prabhupada in many places, to a more broad-minded and inclusive understanding of Krishna consciousness, where you can see that you have friendships across the world, not just according to service, but just according to what is your heart. How do you share Krishna consciousness? How do you appreciate Krishna consciousness? So there is individuality, there is variety, and at the same time, there is an institution and there is cohesiveness. So my humble prayer and request is that we contemplate these points deeply and we assist in the in carrying the message forward in a way that it's actually appealing and attractive and accessible for the people, because that was the mood of our parampara. That is why Srila Prabhupada stayed up and wrote these books. Otherwise, if we tell him, people don't really read nowadays, you you wasted your time, staying up all night. That would not really please Prabhupada. Of course, we have to go and use all the other mediums that are available now also to put Krishna consciousness there. But we should make sure that people are actually reading and understanding the Siddhanta. Otherwise, we'll end up with personality cults that are very short-lived and that are very, actually unimportant, so to speak. So in the name of doing service to our Guru, we should be mindful not to do disservice and to inconvenience others, because it's easy to step on others in order to try to get higher to where you want to go. But then bhakti is not really about, you can't really impress Krishna by by your great achievements. He's not so easily impressionable. Why is Srimati Radharani, Shirade, why is she so much revered and worshipped? Why has she captured Krishna's heart? There's 2 billion gopis. Because she's happy to bring all others to Krishna. She's happy to serve all others in their service. And I find that was an outstanding quality of Bhakti Charu Maharaj, that he encouraged everybody. I remember he went out of his way to accommodate people and to encourage them and to support them, even though they were not his disciples, even though there is nothing in it for him except service. So And that is the mood and the spirit in which we can actually grow as individuals and we can grow as an institution. Coming back to our initial point, it's about culture. And culture is not something you can legislate. I'm not interested in the policies. I'm not interested in the laws. I'm also not interested in the people behind the policies. I want to know whether you care. I'm speaking to Chaitanya Charan Prabhu because I feel you're my friend. I feel you took interest in me, even though I'm not a scientist, I'm not a scholar, I'm not a writer, but you care about me. And that's why we bond, even though we come from different stratospheres, from different parts of the galaxy. and, and that's what makes it interesting. That's what makes it appealing, you know, because it's not only likes and likes that attract each other, it's also opposites that attract each other. So we have to see how, if you want to be more creative, otherwise it's like you have a brahmachari ashram and you keep on piling more and more brahmacharis into it, and at some point it becomes a little crowded, and then it becomes a little overcrowded, and then it becomes claustrophobic. Like the example was given by, you know, if there is nobody who can leave the university, at some point it becomes a little counterproductive. So ISKCON, we should educate people, and then they should move out into the world and be empowered to spread this message according to their taste and capacity. And we should not stifle their development by our own insecurities. Just like if I'm envious of you, at the same time I despise you. I want everything that you have, at the same time I hate you for whatever you stand for. It's not a very good basis for a relationship.
That's true.
There has to be mutual respect and appreciation.
This insecurity.
Otherwise, just as a last point, otherwise, all of a sudden, the children are in the room screaming, the women are in the room screaming, the old people, they're not screaming, but they're in pain. We have to make sure that the different parts of our society actually are served and are heard and are validated and are accepted and appreciated, so that people feel part of this greater family of ISKCON. Otherwise, we will stay very small, and it will take, I mean, we can say all problems will be solved in 100 years. but I mean, my hope and aspiration still is that we see a little bit of sanity in our lifetime, you know? I mean, that's my humble aspiration. And so whoever can work towards this, to bring Guru systems reform 2.0 to our present scenario, it would be very much welcomed. A lot of the leaders and a lot of the rank and file devotees feel like that. I'm personally counseling devotees and aspiring initiates on a weekly basis, and I know so are you. And everyone is feeling the pinch. So what can we do to alleviate the burden of Srila Prabhupada, who wanted to share Krishna consciousness with the world?
Now, again, this I think comes back to the point of individual responsibility. Each of us, if we take more responsibility, then we all can contribute, as you said, to making Srila Prabhupada's movement become a more transparent channel of Krishna's mercy and contribute to raising human consciousness. So I'll try to summarize, and then you can add if I've. So we discussed basically on the topic of having harmony among different gurus in our movement. So we started by talking about how sectarianism can be such a problem that sometimes inside our movement we are coldly received, and outside our movement, in some other tradition like your experience in Kazakhstan, that you were warmly received. So this Uzbekistan, sorry. So then now why might this happen? So while there is at one level, it's a universal mentality of sectarianism comes up for this reason, that reason. Now in our case, sectarianism might come in a spiritual seeming garb, and that spiritual seeming garb is the identity of its guru centrism or guru groupism. So now in that connection, because the guru is our defining relationship, quite often that may not seem like sectarianism, that might seem spiritual. But if we look back at our broader culture, so you talked about first point was I think education, that if we see what Prabhupada has given us in his books like the Chaitanya Charitamrita, and we look back at the greater Mahabharata culture, then the emphasis is on, say, serving Lord Chaitanya together, no, or serving the Lord together, being a part of the Brahmanical culture, not so much on who is my guru. And sometimes in glorifying one's spiritual master, one may actually be doing disservice. Like you give the example of Ramakant Vishwas and Advaita Acharya. And so now we discussed about differentiating when does worship of the spiritual master degenerate to becoming a spiritual cult or a personality cult rather. That is when venerating the personality becomes so important that we overlook the teachings. So at an individual level, we can connect with our spiritual master and we can venerate and worship. At a social level, within the community and beyond, we need to focus on the teaching of the spiritual master. And the teaching is to serve Krishna, to carry on Krishna's message, to give Krishna's message to others. So through Prabhupada's books, when there is an emphasis on the spiritual master, we need to see that as Prabhupada is our founder Acharya. So his position is like Ramanujacharya or Madhvacharya. And subsequent spiritual masters, they are all united in the service of Srila Prabhupada. And one way that distinctiveness of Srila Prabhupada's position can become highlighted and the other guru centrism might go down is if we have more and more devotees initiating. Because right now itself, as you said, each spiritual master exists which may have to initiate 20,000 disciples. That's impossible to actually have personal relationships. So although the opportunity for them to be empowered may be from that's not on our control, but from the individual devotee side, devotee needn't have to think that I need a guru who has thousands of disciples. You can look at who inspires me and choose the spiritual master from that perspective. And then lastly, we talked about education, empowerment, and then we could say individual service or individual responsibility for service. So if my identity comes from my belonging to a group in which I am thrust, say I belong to this group, this is my guru, then that group identity can very easily lead to insecurity. Because if I feel that, hey, that group is becoming bigger than my group, that spiritual guru is being glorified more than my guru. So that is not a group identity, even centered on a guru, is not necessarily a spiritual identity. So if our identity is centered on our service to Krishna, then each devotee feels that responsibility to serve Krishna. Then those devotees will naturally bond with other like-minded devotees who have a similar inspiration to serve Krishna. And because there is closeness over there, and we need closeness, because as devotees, we need relationships. But if there is a healthy respect for individuality, then we can have closeness among those with whom we are like-minded, but we won't become close-minded because we'll respect others' individuality. Yes, they are inspired in that way, and they will move forward in their way. So that way we can have closeness without close-mindedness. I think in the conclusion, you mentioned this point that now we all have a responsibility for Prabhupada's mission. And to the extent we think, how can I carry on for Prabhupada's mission? I like those three words: attractive, appealing, and accessible. So if we do that, then we all can actually become channels for Prabhupada's mercy to manifest, Krishna's mercy to manifest. Any concluding points you want to say, Prabhu?
Yes, I was in Rome. Thank you. I admire your brilliant mind. Maybe one day you can give me lessons on how to develop this capacity. I was in Rome getting visas for West Africa, and I saw that there was less than 20% Caucasians amongst the priests. 80% were Latinos, South Americans, Africans, and Asians. So our movement's demographics are shifting, and it's very important that we understand this and we take note of this and we accommodate this. Otherwise, history will not easily absolve us, because the future generations will look at us and say, you guys were a bunch, I mean, they won't say you're a bunch of idiots because they will be cultured. So they will say it in a nice way, because you did not really do your homework. You did not really do what you were supposed to be doing. You know why Chaitanya Mahaprabhu spoke the verse, Yaride Ketare Kaha Krishna Upadesh, Amara Jnana Guru Hanatara Edesh? In his time, the current misunderstanding was you have to be a Grihasta Brahmin. Otherwise, you cannot be a guru. And he said, no, it's okay.
That's beautiful. You know, there are so many statements of Lord Chaitanya which are so universalist. And in some ways, if you just go deeper into our tradition,
Important point.
yeah, in some ways, if you just
Yes.
go deeper
And
into our
so
tradition,
even if we start reading one verse a day, it may take us 46 years to complete Srimad Bhagavatam, but you know, we got to start somewhere and have that Tushyanti Chara Manticha, that sharing of like-minded association. So please, I'd like to encourage the devotees, start reading groups, start sharing your realization, discuss what it means in your life for you, and what do you plan to do to apply it. Like Prabhupada was telling Vishal in Vrindavan, who was chanting nice Sanskrit shlokas, why don't you go and do something practical? You know, he stopped him and said, why don't you go and do something practical? So Prabhupada was a very practical person. Now in our movement, we have seen many things, and I like to conclude on this point that if a manager is trying to be a sadhu, it's actually a very good thing, because he will start preaching Bhagavatam Katha, and he will start studying Shastra, and he will start doing all these things. But if a sadhu is trying to manage, it really compromises his credibility. So if we can accommodate our senior revered members and allow them to be elders, allow them to be spiritual guides, allow them to be just sharing Krishna consciousness. And you were bringing up the yatras. Yes, we have yatras. To also invite their god brothers, to also invite disciples of other gurus to their yatras, and to make it a truly inclusive experience. That would be very much in the spirit of Bhaktivinoda Thakur, very much in the spirit of Srila Prabhupada. And I think that will send a very inspiring message to the future generations. Otherwise, I can't be a Swami Narayan follower. Why? Because I don't speak Gujarati. I can't be a Catholic priest because I dropped out of 9th grade and I did not go to seminary and study, Latin. So Krishna consciousness is here to stay, and it should be accessible, attractive, and relevant, so that people actually feel that you're speaking to me, you're speaking my language, I can do this. And that was the mood of Jayananda Prabhu, who would pick people off the street and say, can you hold a nail? That was his way of qualifying people. and he made more devotees than many others put together. He was also driving a cab full time and taking out the trash and doing renovations. And he was also the temple president, by the way. So if we can allow our senior members to actually be sadhus, to be spiritual guides, and not have to manage and deal with men and money all the time, that would be a great service. So we have so many qualified people in our institution.
I think that's a whole big subject in itself.
Yes.
And let's, because
for another day.
At a conclusion, another subject will be difficult. Let's discuss it some other time. Thank you very much for your association, Prabhu. It is wonderful talking with you.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.